And we are back on this 0 hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us now is Kymone Freeman. Kymone is an artist, he is an activist, and he is a co-founder of the We Act radio network. Kymone, thanks for joining us.
Peace and blessings. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And listen, I want to engage all three aspects of your career on this. I want to talk to you about Baltimore. And I think while we're going to stay on the day-to-day breaking news of this story, I think you and I would probably agree this reflects underlying structural issues, underlying economic violence, silent violence, and also misperceptions in the media that keep us from addressing this story fully as a nation. And if we agree with that, let's take it from there.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's talk then a little bit about the coverage, the way this has been presented by the mainstream media to the public at large. Let's talk about that for a second. You got people complicit in that, politicians and so on. But let's stick with the media for a second. What are your thoughts on the coverage we've seen so far coming out of Baltimore?
Well, the African proverb that comes to play, and it simply says, until the lions have their historians, the tales of the hunt will continue to glorify the hunters. That means to say that with the six corporations that control most of what we see here and read, you're not going to see much diversity in their narrative. That narrative has been that this is, senseless violence committed by, animals. That is the underlying narrative that you've gotten across the board from various media outlets regarding Baltimore. But if you have noticed, in 2014 of last year, there was a riot over the World Series in San Francisco. They was not called animals; they was called revelers, and a very costless celebration. That is the difference in the narrative and the presentation. They were not protesting against the senseless murders of unarmed black people across this country. That we have seen a pandemic occurring, and as Martin Luther King said, riots are the voices of the unheard. And I think that people should begin to listen and understand the root causes of these actions rather than condemning the actions themselves. Because I'm not condoning any of the senseless violence regarding the destruction of property. But if they do not respect black lives, how can they expect us to respect their property? And any time we have a war of aggression that the United States is famous for, they have acceptable amounts of collateral damage. They have acceptable amounts of civilian casualties. But yet, when when the chickens come home to roost, all of a sudden violence is not acceptable.
You know, and certain forms of violence are escalated above others. I mean, one of the things that strikes me about this as shocking is the fact that there's been so little coverage of the deaths of young black men at the hands of police, and yet there's so much coverage of the destruction or damaging of a CVS. And like you, look, it's not that anybody is saying, well, it's fine to destroy property, but where's our proportionality here in the media in terms of a life versus a plate glass window?
Well, in terms of proportionality, and so eloquently that you pointed it out, people need to go back and look at the timeline. This riot could have been avoided. The police instigated this to an extent. They shut down the metro system prior to school being let out, which means that entire student bodies was in the street, stranded with no way home, and was forced to walk through the streets. And as such, a lot of the other residents of Baltimore hurled racial slurs at them. This thing was instigated from the beginning, and people need to understand the police department's role in this, the larger community role in this, and that you cannot push people but so far. And at some point in time, this is not an anomaly or an event. It's not an isolated event. We've seen riots plaguing urban areas of this country for a century, because the living standards and the situations that make these volatile, combustible communities have not changed. And even with the face of a black president, a black attorney general, a black mayor, a black police department, fundamentally the system has not changed. And therefore, we are here to say that at some point, the police have to reflect the community that they serve, whether they live in that community, whether they are of that community, but they cannot be a foreign occupying force of that community.
And, we're talking with Kymone Freeman, artist and activist, about the situation in Baltimore and the underlying situation in Baltimore. And, there's so many aspects of this story. One of them is the militarization of our urban police forces, the fact that so many weapons formerly used in foreign engagements by occupying armies are now being given to our urban police forces, and they're being trained to think like occupying armies. Not only don't they live there, but and are not necessarily part of the community in many cases, but they also have the weaponry and the attitude. But then you have something, the Baltimore police, let's face it, they're known for being violent. I mean, they have that reputation. And there's this thing they do called the Rough Ride, and discussions about whether that was involved in Mr. Gray's death. But you have where they just bang people, don't buckle people in, and they bang them around the vehicle as they drive them around. Just another form of abuse. The fact that, to me, that's even a thing, a rough ride, and that's not being discussed is just. I don't know how to put that into words even.
Well, I mean, you just did. And, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather is from Baltimore. And this situation has been brewing for generations. And there was a young man who died of one of those rough rides and was awarded a small settlement a few years ago. So there's cases, there's been a precedent for that. But the fact of the matter is this. We need to understand is that the narrative of rioting helps the narrative of the police.
Right.
It reinforces, see how they act? This is why we need to treat them this way. This is why we need all this weaponry. This is why we need the militarization. They're animals. This is how we only can contain them, to prevent them from coming to your front yard. That is why in Ferguson there was a 9 p.m. Press conference to incite a riot. That's why the metro system was shut down prior to the school letting out, so these kids would be aimlessly left stranded in sections of the city. That is the desired effect, because that takes the heat off of the crime that was committed in this most recent police murder. And people need to understand that and develop some level of sophistication to understand how the system functions.
So do you think, we're talking with Kymone Freeman on the Zero Hour on We Act Radio, so do you think that, I'm actually, you know me, I'm usually, I know what I think, but I'm trying to wrap my head around this one, that, and I'll need your help here, okay? To me, it's inexplicable. There's no human logic that says if you have a volatile situation like you have in Baltimore right now, you close down the metro system when you have all those middle school, high school, junior high students out there. That is a recipe for violence. I mean, my brain does not want to say, well, they deliberately wanted the violence, but I cannot come up with an explanation for an action like that a sane person would do other than that.
Well, they say that when poverty knocks on the door, love goes out the window. And what people need to understand by that, what it means is that petty crime has its roots in poverty, in ignorance, and in desperation. Why would an otherwise rational person rob a bank? That's an act of desperation. No one has done that in this situation. No one has been killed in this situation, and I would like to credit the mayor of Baltimore for that, because I think that she has practiced some restraint, or at least put a leash on some of the road cops under her watch. She has, however, categorized her own citizens as thugs. However, I take her to the task for that. But people need to understand is that if they want to avoid the largest prison system in the world spilling over into their front yard, then they must acknowledge that we have a blighted community that's been long neglected, that has no opportunity, has no hope for the future, and therefore they are dangerous. And until we address that and acknowledge that the society role in creating these conditions, because Baltimore is a blue-collar town where the factories have been shipped out overseas, and people are basically unable to find a way to sustain themselves. There's a 60% unemployment rate for young black people in the city of Baltimore. 60% unemployment. But when you have a system that is privatized, prisons being profits making on the stock exchange, then this is the type of situation financially that they want. This is the desired result that they want. But obviously, that is not accepted by the people that's been affected by this.
And if you have a system where you've built into it this enormously high level of unemployment, and you also have this, frankly, I would describe it as an extension of slavery, in a sense, a commodification of African-American bodies into the prison system. It's that bad if you look at the numbers. Then if you have those two factors together, then I guess from one point of view, if you look at the logic, what else are you going to do but have a militarized police force to try to contain the violence? What else are you going to do but just use any incident as an example to distract the public eye and the public mind from the underlying forces at work here?
I think we need nothing less than a guaranteed employment for all people. I believe that that should challenge the racist notion, I would mind you, of black people being lazy or ignorant or what have you, because quite frankly, no one has worked harder in America than black people, and for free, by the way. But guaranteed employment is what is needed. America's infrastructure is sorely lacking. We have bridges collapsing with people in their cars in them. There's no excuse for people who want to have a job unable to work. The puritanical notion that if you don't work, you don't eat, that was fine when there was more work available than people willing to do it. That is not sufficient in a capitalist society. We need guaranteed employment. That in itself will prevent any of these issues from happening. And when I say guaranteed employment, I do mean a living wage at that. That is what is needed, and nothing less than that should be acceptable, because people have a right to dignity and to support their families.
And this is not a radical idea. This is an idea that used to be mainstream in the discussion. It's certainly an idea that everybody involved in the civil rights struggle, from Dr. King to Malcolm X to anybody else that was involved in the 60s, understood was an inherent part of a just society. So, and now it's being presented as if, well, that's crazy talk. But that, in fact, that I couldn't agree with you more, Kymone Freeman, that that's where we ought to be going in this. Instead, we're distracting ourselves. All of a sudden, we're not only not talking about the institutional violence of unemployment, we're not only not talking about the institutional violence of lifespans being so many years shorter in the inner city, or the level of disability being higher, or the disease levels being higher. Not only are we not talking about this, we're not even talking about the immediate cause of this violence, which is the horrific record of the Baltimore police that was so effectively profiled in the Baltimore Sun. 87-year-old grandmothers thrown to the ground and broken shoulders, young children, and so on. So, how do we get the conversation, I guess in the couple minutes we have left, how do we get the conversation away from, the mother slaps her child, and if we could just slap all of them? I mean, that's the implication. See, that's what makes me so angry, is that every time I see that mother video, then the answer is, well, if we could just slap all those people, then everything would be okay. How do we get the conversation away from that and where it needs to be on these institutional forms of violence?
Well, quite frankly, America has been slapping black people for 400 years. I think the nature of our relationship, black Americans' relationship with the white establishment in America, has been one of an abused wife. Black people are the abused wife, and America is the abusive husband. And black people's whole attitude was that one day he will love me. One day they will accept me. They will respect me. One day I would be treated with equality and justice and fairness. And that has never happened, because as you well know, in most dysfunctional relationships, there's no happy ending. And until we realize what we're dealing with, because the fact is, you have a rust belt of unemployed, working-class white people who came into the inner cities, and they're dominating the police force, and they have their own agendas, and quite frankly, some of them are actually enjoying their work while they take someone on a rough ride. Most people would tell you that, how you doing, Ethan Burke Miller? I'm on the radio with RJ Eskow on a 0 hour, and I'm at the National Press Club in the lobby here, and a great writer in Washington, D.C., Ethan Burke Miller, just came by. Just want to shout him out. And he would tell you as well that this is nothing new in terms of police treatment of black people. What is new is that we now have the documentation, because before nobody was believing our stories, no one was caring for our stories. There wasn't shows like yours that's put given light to this issue, because since corporations control most of what we see, hear, and read. But now, in the information age, we're able to tell the lying story and get the truth of the matter out and offer a different perspective that runs counter than the official police report. So I thank you for acknowledging this, and hopefully we'll be able to have some qualitative change in this on this issue in our lifetime. And I do mean our lifetime immediately, if not sooner.
And that's exactly what I meant when I said that I wanted to engage you as an artist and an activist and as one of the founders of We Act Radio Network, because we do need the alternative media. We do need to tell this story, and we do need to stay active. So Kymone Freeman, in all of those incarnations, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you do.
And you too. And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.